Hello, I am Fons.
And I am Michael, and you are listening to episode 1 of the F.A.M podcast.
Episode uno.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. Today we are going to be kind of touching on the debate that is happening with Jesse Cannon and Nick D. The beef.
Yeah. For all of us that aren't participating in the Drake and Kendrick beef, this is our beef.
This is the behind the scenes music beef at the
Absolutely.
moment. Fonz and I, a little backstory. We are both aspiring professional musicians, and we spend a lot of time kind of going through and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't in the landscape that is music today.
Indeed.
But I guess to get us started, our overall thoughts. You want to get us going on what your thoughts are with this Jesse Cannon and Nick D beef?
Yeah, I mean, personally, for me, it was like a crazy, whiplash, because I feel like I have... my mama's calling me. I feel as though it's difficult to sometimes have to maintain a sense of direction when you have a lot of voices out there that are kind of pushing you one way and the other. And these two in particular is kind of extreme because they are sort of on the two opposite ends of the opinion board.
Yeah.
And so I think that essentially Nick D's perspective and his approach of just like constantly releasing was, for me, it was very beneficial in the beginning to have like a personal win. So for me, I needed that the personal gain I needed was I had never consistently released,
right,
and never kept up with like content in that at that capacity. So it was good for me to start with that, to sort of prove to myself, or to have a win for myself, that like I can do this consistently and be dedicated to it. However, it didn't show that it was about 4 months in, there wasn't a whole lot of growth.
Yeah. And
it did feel like there was serious sort of burnout. And it almost did feel, in hindsight, as though I was abandoning the songs too early doing it that way.
Sure.
And so I felt what I kind of described when I got here as kind of like information overload. I just felt like I wasn't sure what direction to take it in. And I got to hand it to the Jesse video, that it gave a little bit more of like a sense of direction, and kind of it helped me to see things a little bit clearer. Yeah.
There's, kind of going into both thought processes, I think the hard defining line, I love how Nick really went into like just doing it to get it done, like kind of touched on what you're saying, like a lot of people say they're gonna do something and then they just don't do it, and I've fallen guilty of that a lot. Like,
yeah, me too.
I really want to put out this many songs this year, but then you sit down and at the end of the year you've only done 4. You know, like, I think the fact that Nick is always talking about like, oh, we have to put out a song every 2 weeks, while that does seem excessive, and it's a lofty goal realistically, especially with like all the content you have to do,
right?
I think props to that, because it does get you kind of moving.
It does,
whether or not it's a negative as far as the algorithm and Spotify goes, like how Jesse's talking about.
Yeah.
But I also hear Jesse, like, kind of like I was telling you earlier before the podcast, like the devil's advocate. Like, I think they both have solid points. Like, Jesse talks about doing this 60 days of pushing your content versus just doing that every 2 weeks, because you're not really doing anything. And I think the adverse side of that is you get too focused on just creating and releasing every 2 weeks, and then you're not doing the content behind it, and it's not getting you forward. Yeah,
I think there's like a...
It's like a balance.
There is, right? Because one side of it is looking at it like, okay, well, every 2 weeks, because the one that's going to pop off is just going to pop off. Yeah. So just keep moving through them, which I like can see the a valid point in that. And then the other one is slow and steady. Really, really push this one that you have out.
Tortoise in the hare.
Right. Yeah. And I think that there's something to be said too, that I think probably a lot of what worked for Nick D is like worked for him because sometimes things just like it works for him, you know. I think seeing a lot of his content, I definitely don't want to say like he got lucky, like to undermine like the work that he put in, because I don't think that's what it is. But I'm just saying is all of those things clicked for him.
Sure.
And the style of music that he's producing and writing, the style of content that he makes, his personality type, like it seemed like all of those pieces fit for him to be a type of person that's like, I'm just putting out what I love to do, and then that's going to work. And I think that there are some people that they kind of have that and they own that and they should lean into that. Like I think if you're someone that relates to him in that style, then, you know, maybe go for it. But I definitely think that that's a hard one size fits all sort of model to emulate.
Well, and I think the other thing you brought up too before is that we go through a lot of music. Like we digest a lot of music. We try to see what's going on. And talking about like the fan base that Nick D has built, like how sustainable is it with like you and I listen to a lot of music, how much have we actually heard from his stuff? Like as big of an artist as he is, and not to say like there's not huge artists out there we haven't listened to, because I mean that's an argument in itself, but like is the content that he's putting out every 2 weeks actually good enough to last 10 years? And I think you and I both have that mentality of like we want to create something that's sustainable or worthwhile, and not just have like that overnight success of building up to 1 million people all of a sudden that might not care about you in 6 months. I think it boils down to, at least for me personally, it's been reminding myself that what the shit that makes me really happy is not really the flash in the pan kind of stuff. And I think it's easy to get caught up in what everyone online is telling you to do, and losing sight of like what it is that is really going to make you sort of happy. And that's kind of an oversimplification, but I think I just honing in and being specific as to what you want. So for instance, for me, I had to sort of take a break and realize that I'm following a lot of people's advice and content strategies of artists that like we would not do well on a tour together. Sure.
And so there is a sense of, why am I cultivating a content strategy around their fan base when their fan base probably wouldn't be into what I'm doing?
So like it's not going to directly relate to your style of music, because every fan base has its own different kind of niches. Yeah, like I feel like I've been
following the advice of someone because they have a shit ton of followers.
Sure.
And their TikTok is doing really well. But at the same time, I'm thinking their fans, if I gained their fans or piggybacked off of their fan base, they wouldn't be really into it. So I've had to recently start looking up and really trying to find bands that would be like, it's like a friend group. It's like, these would be good. I could share a fan base with these guys, and it would feel natural to me. And this is the content that it seems like that fan base is eating up.
Yeah.
And
maybe ours won't individually.
And no surprise that I'm like, oh,
it's not working.
I like this content, and so does this fan base. Why? Because that fan base is like my tribe.
Right.
And I've been making the mistake of just kind of like looking at random big followings and trying to win them over. And so I think being specific about that, because ultimately this all boils down to, I do like something I really like that Nick is always driving home is like, what do you want? Yeah. Like, what do you specifically want? Yep. And I think that that's really important, and goes along with what I'm saying is sometimes you have to sit with your plan and say, okay, but if this blew up, would I be stoked about why it's blowing up, or because you might gain 1 million followers and then you're making a bunch of content that you fucking hate making. And then what's the point of that? So, that I think is like been important for me personally.
Well, I think it's it's interesting talking about your tribe too, because going back to Nick, he obviously has paired himself very well with artists that like he somehow aligns with, maybe not 100%, but like
right.
looking at I'm spacing his name right now, the rapper kid,
Connor Price.
Yeah. Like looking at like Connor Price and like their relationship together, they obviously have done a lot of different stuff. Like Nick has definitely more of a hip hop vibe in some of his earlier stuff, but he's done country, he's done other stuff, and he's tag teamed along with Connor on like their albums together. And obviously, so from you and I, like you're doing more of your rock, like pop rock, you know, emo alternative stuff.
Yep.
And I'm focusing kind of more on like this pop country kind of acoustic thing.
Yeah.
Even more of like just like that pop EDM kind of stuff. I know those are two completely different genres, but looking at those and talking about your tribe, like we think about it, like we know who our people are.
Yeah.
Like you go to a concert, you look around, you're like, these are my people. So how do you take what they've given, which is obviously good information on the structure overall, but maybe not copying it to 100% point of like, this is the content he's making on a day-to-day basis, but this is the schedule he does.
Yeah.
And how that relates to like how Jesse's kind of attacking him for that. Because Jesse in a lot of ways speaks to what Nick's doing.
Exactly.
On like, hey, you have to make this content. You have to do this every day. A lot like the larger scheme is a full-time job.
Right.
And people don't want to put that effort in. And it's adding those tiny rocks like he was talking about, not just hoping that big boulder is. But kind of on top of that, not to like steamroll this point, but the whole like, if we were to get 1 million followers overnight, neither of us would be upset about it. I think it's more of the fact that you want something that is that sustainable, that tribe, versus having just like that flash in the pan, because you want a community of people.
Yeah, you do. And I think, I mean, I don't think we'd be upset, but if it were for the, like, with the wrong reasons, I don't think we'd be as stoked. It's like, that wouldn't be sustainable either.
Right.
And then I think that there's, like, I don't know. I think for me personally, there's even there's a mental side to all of this too, that if like I blew up with something that I didn't want, it would almost even hurt more, because I'm just like, so the thing I wanted to do didn't blow up, and then this thing that I don't care about is blowing up. Like, I don't know. So
I've been trying so hard for so long, and now it's like,
right, this thing that I totally don't want to happen. But no, I agree. I think the structure has been solid, especially the Jesse's like 60-day plan.
Yeah.
That is great, because, and it's like what we were talking about. I haven't been like seeking a cheat code, but definitely a structure is all I've needed.
Sure.
And then from there, looking at the fan base that you want. And I think that's where like live music is such a great thing. Anytime I've been to a show where it's a band that I love, that's similar to the stuff that I'm doing, it's crazy being at that show and being like, man, like how everyone here in this room, like 90% of the people in this room would probably be super into my stuff because you're in this room. And I know that if you like why you're here, you'll probably like my thing. And that's where it's like, those are the moments where I felt the serious desperation of, how do I get to all of you in this room here, you know? And that feels a lot more attainable to me than like just the general, like massive, like worldly audience.
Going back a second on what you said, do you think the fear of having like that negative response prevents you from creating things that you normally like would want to? Do you know what I mean? Like you're so like, because I think for me there's a fear of like, oh, I don't want to make myself look a fool while I do this because I don't want it to garner the wrong attention. And then because of that, you end up doing less. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like it's obviously we have to make a decent amount of content in order to have success within this career field at this point in time.
Yeah.
And I do think like I have ideas in my head and I'm like, oh, that'd be so cool. Like I could do this. But then I get to like kind of piecing it together. I'm like, wow, I'm going to look like an idiot. Like,
yeah, interesting. Yeah. For me, if I think it's a good idea, I don't feel the sense of like, I'm going to look like an idiot. Or maybe I think I'm going to look like an idiot, but I've understood. For me, it's like the only time I feel that way, like I'm going to look like an idiot, is when I'm not stoked on the idea.
Okay.
Because I feel like I have a sense, and maybe I give people too much credit, or maybe it's just the right amount. I really believe that whole, like the audience can sniff it out of you if it's not authentic.
Yeah.
And so for me, if I'm doing something that feels as though I'm doing it totally for TikTok, I'm like, this thing is just to play on this trend, and I'm uncomfortable with it, that I'm like, I'm going to feel like a total fucking fool. Like looking, or I'm going to look like a fool. But if I have an idea that I'm like, that excites me, I kind of have this general idea and belief that if I'm super stoked about it, there are going to be people that are super stoked about it. And I also just consistently, I think I'm also at a place in my life where I'm 32 years old and I'm a single dad. And so like everything I do at this point that's not a 9-to-5 is basically me looking like a fool. So I've kind of almost just like accepted, regardless, someone is going to be watching what I'm doing, even if it's in my mind the coolest thing. They're going to be like, this is the most cringy shit ever.
But do you think like, I mean, I feel like you and I have gotten to a point that we'll just kind of do whatever it takes.
Yes.
And that's taken a long time. But do you think like people that might be listening are like going through that? And if you do, like for me, like my perspective is just do it. Like you kind of just have to like,
yeah, I mean,
don't be afraid to do something like that just because you think it might be received wrong.
Yeah. Because here's the thing, man. I mean, like people, it's like it's the same shit I teach my 7-year-old.
Yeah.
It's like if you're doing what you love to do, if you're doing stuff that excites you, if you're doing things that make you feel cool, honestly, fuck the rest. Like, because the people that don't have anything constructive negatively to say. Like, it's different if someone says, hey, I can see where I love your approach, but maybe your execution isn't solid, and they offer you something, maybe that person's, people are always going to have opinions, but maybe there's something constructive in that. Someone that has like no constructive criticism and they're just like hating on you, like people like that, literally, I firmly believe they don't deserve a second thought. Like
well,
that.
And that also kind of feeds into the fact that that's not your tribe. Like
exactly.
You want people, like not everyone's going to like your stuff. Not everyone is going to appreciate the work that you put in.
Yeah.
People are going to hate, and it's understanding that that's okay.
Yeah. You don't want those people. Like you don't want, I apply the same thing in my own personal life.
Yeah.
In that, like anything you do or a relationship that you have, if it's not a fuck yes, then it's a fuck no.
Yep.
I don't like doing anything like in the middle, and that's obviously like a really clickbaity way to say something, but it's not that it's like relationships aren't complicated, but it's just, but ultimately you only want the people that really fuck with you.
Yeah.
If they're done, you're not in this business to try to like convince someone,
right?
Like, hey, look at my shit. Like it's let me trick you into liking this. And that's partially why sometimes I don't like some of the content strategies, like the actual like content out there that's almost like
do this for 14 days.
Or even just like do this style of skit to convince the person that you're likable, and then they might like you. I'm leaning, as I go along with this, I'm leaning more into doing the things that are just like focused on the music, and if you like it, cool. And I really like that about Nick D, and the way that he describes that. It's like, if it's not for you, it's not for you, and I'm not going to convince you otherwise. And if it is, then it is, because I'm the same way.
It's basic, like it comes down to basic marketing, where I've told you this analogy before, but it's like opening a restaurant in the middle of town and not putting up billboards, not putting out flyers, not telling people that you're there. Like, you have to put that time in and understand who your audience is and how you're going to reach them. And understand people are going to throw that flyer away. People aren't going to look at your mail. Like, but the people that do care or that they are interested, they're going to put that time in. And it might take a week or two to get to that point of sending them the same thing over and over and over. It's the same thing that applies into social media. Like we have, like, people say consistency is key, and it's so easily overlooked. Like we can talk about that all the time about, man, I have to be posting this, man, I have to be making that.
Right.
Even down to making a song every 6 weeks or posting TikToks every day. Like when you stop doing that, you're only hurting yourself.
Right.
Because no one else is going to do it for you.
Yes.
And no one else is going to care if you don't care.
Right.
So finding your tribe is going to play a lot into how you market that and how you're building yourself up. And do you care enough about your own self and your own music to do anything that it takes?
Right.
And I mean, I think that kind of ties back into the information overload. Like, do you care enough where you are watching all that stuff and you're getting that information overload, but are you actually doing anything about it?
Right.
Are you sitting there and like applying that, or are you just watching YouTube videos, listening to whatever, like podcasts like this, and not applying any of it to your life? Because you can go to seminar after seminar and for better help,
is what does
but the practice is where it comes in.
Yeah. And that's partially why I had to go through that time period of doing the quick releases and just like consistent like daily content with those, was to kind of at least get something rolling and then seeing if,
and it can be defeating though too.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, over COVID, I did 80 YouTube videos of song covers, and the more I did, the more like I would hope or expect for some outcome of it. And when I didn't see it, it would just defeat you, and then your content would get worse. And it's like, you have to find that middle ground of burnout and consistency, where like maybe you just sit there for a week and make a bunch of content that you can post for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
You don't have to do it every day.
Yeah.
But the posting is the important part, and kind of like figuring out that healthy in between. Yeah,
the in between is important, I think, because again, if you're just doing a bunch of shit every day that you really hate, you're just gonna burn out, and it's not gonna help you. So it's like understanding,
and people see that.
Yeah,
it's the authenticity.
Right.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, find what you enjoy doing, and that is partially why you have to have that conversation with yourself, because there are people that will do a skit or something, or do a type of content, and it's exciting for them. Like, they enjoy doing it. Absolutely. And that's like, I'm not saying don't do that. I'm saying if you like doing that. But if you're someone like me, who I don't enjoy doing that. So I will do that every once in a while with someone that does enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, okay, I'm having a good time because you're like facilitating like the enjoyment of this. But me trying to do it, just, it doesn't play out that way. So, but yeah.
So the next kind of talking point, the next talking point was basically like, Jesse talks a lot about kind of what we're talking about right now is creating mid music. Yeah. And I think if you don't care about what you're making, or you don't love what you're doing, it is going to come out unauthentic.
That's for sure.
I thought it was really interesting. The point that he made was a little, like, in my head, controversial about the Taylor Swift, like, Tortured Poets department, because he talks about, like, she's gotten to a point where he speaks that she's just putting out whatever. And she did a whole double album. I could make the argument that maybe she did write 200 songs and she took the top 25 or however many songs she put out.
Yeah.
But I also understand the fact of not all those songs are great, or outside of like her core like group of believers in her music, which is what you want. You want your tribe. But to the average listener who doesn't follow her, it doesn't sound that great. Like, it just sounds maybe repetitive. Like, my wife's a huge Taylor Swift fan, and I've heard a lot of the stuff in the background. And there are like points that have like that earworm capability of, that's that Taylor Swift song. Do I know what it's called? Not necessarily. But that's how a lot of those TikTok kind of songs are at this point.
Yeah.
But refining your work to make sure that it is of a quality that you appreciate,
right?
And that you're not just doing that burnout music. Like, I have to make this song. It has to be out in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Like, if you have to give yourself 8 weeks, 10 weeks to truly make a song that you think is like, this is it,
right?
Do that, but also don't hinder yourself. Where I have like friends that have made one song over 3 years, and then they never release it, and they're on revision 95.
For
and
sure.
The way that the song sounded originally, that was so cool, is nothing like the final product.
Right.
Like, at that point, you could have released 6 songs, and they all would have been in that same vein, but they would all be different because you redid it and remastered it and remixed it, and like, you know.
Yeah, I mean that kind of goes to show that a lot of what we're talking about, a lot of it really only applies to, and this is very important, I think, for sometimes people to keep in mind, is this is after you've honed in your craft.
Yeah.
And because the conversation is very different when you are someone that it takes you a month to produce a song.
Yep.
It takes you 2 months to mix a song. It takes you however long to, to get all that stuff done. That's very, 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 very different. Because, and don't
rush that process.
Don't rush that process. But I would say, I think that I made the mistake of, I did all of my like growth in the behind the scenes.
Sure.
So, and I think that there's something valuable about like having an audience like grow with you.
Mm-hmm.
I think people really do like that. But for me, it was like I had to get to a place where like now, like I'm not in a place now where like production and like mixing is like, oh man, one day I'll get to. It's like literally like
one day it'll sound like the pros.
I can literally put it like anything I put out now from my own bedroom is literally at the same competing level as like anything else that's out there.
And to speak on that too, like I think there is that huge focus, and I know a lot of people say this, but you don't need the greatest gear in the world to do it.
No, you don't.
You just need to have the understanding of how things work
and the understanding. I think a lot of, and I know for a fact because I have a lot of friends that do this as well, and they are always horrified by my rig because it is. I am like, just a strong believer in make it work. But the thing is, I have the understanding of how to use those things, and so that's my point is. Getting to a place where if you're still really stuck on, it goes back again to what you want to do, because a lot of times like there's also this thing being like believed that sometimes we have to be the person that does everything when your favorite artist doesn't do that.
Right.
I'm able to do all of those things because I started when I was 14 years old.
Yeah.
And now I'm 32. Because
it takes time
to get to this place.
You have to learn how to write a song,
yes.
like the very basics, like what is A B C. Right. Like you have to know the theory of your craft. Like there's a lot of people that are like, oh, this is your new theory hack in Ableton or Pro Tools or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not going to help you in the long term. Yeah, you might be able to make a song or two with that, but like understanding your fundamentals are so important, because you're able to go and listen to a song and be able to dissect it and understand like this is what makes it great.
Yeah.
And then once you get to that point, then you can learn how to produce it a little bit better and figure out how a compressor works and why an equalizer does what it does.
Yep.
And then you can go and like figure out the video stuff. I mean, it takes years, and I think we're in such a society of that instant gratification. Like I want to go get a sandwich down the street,
right,
and it is 5 minutes, versus having to sit here and hone your craft for a good amount of time. I mean, you and I have both been doing this for well over 15 years.
Right.
And while we have our successes here and there, like the end of the day, we're not where we want to be, to a point that we're still learning, and that learning never stops.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, but again, honing in the craft and playing to your strengths is the thing, because if you are, unless you want to become a mixing engineer, I don't know why you need to be like going at it hours and hours and hours trying to get your, like, outsource that shit. If you're not great at production, and then outsource that shit.
Yep.
And obviously like budget and costs like plays into a lot of those things, but there's a lot of options out there of
Fiverr,
like real cheap stuff of people that a lot of us that are doing that are producing or mixing at sort of a top tier capacity, top tier level are doing a lot of this shit for very, 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 very cheap. You know?
Well, I mean, there's Sound Better. You can literally hire Grammy award winning mixers for under $100.
Yep.
Like, yes, you don't want to do that for every single song if you're on a tight budget, because $100 times 20, I mean, that it adds up quick, but maybe that's where you refine that down to those 5 songs you think are really good and you focus on those that year. I mean, I think that just kind of comes back down to that content schedule.
Yep.
It's not necessarily about how much you release music, where you could do the Nick D side of every 2 weeks. You could do the Jesse Cannon side of every 6 to 8 weeks.
Right.
It's how you fill that time in between, and are you filling that time in between, or are you just wasting your time? And I'm guilty of that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 100% guilty of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And making sure, again, and it's got to be about the song. It's got to sound good. It's got, because here's the other thing. I mean, I do think there is like the final 10% of what someone who's been doing this for forever will understand in a mix or in a production, is totally wasted on the average listener.
Oh, 100%.
So I don't think that it's like you need to have this super pristine radio ready thing to have something have success. But there is a huge difference between something that sounds like a demo and something that sounds like it's completed.
Like, my wife will come in here while I'm working on music, and I'll show her something that I've, like, this is my rough draft, like, this is how that sounds, and I'll show her something that's completely finished, and then I'll show her the third mix after that, and she'll be like, it sounds the same. It
sounds the same, yeah.
Because it's like how we were talking about wine earlier. It's like wine. A $15 bottle of wine versus a $1,500 bottle of wine, to someone who doesn't drink wine that often, they're not going to know the difference if you pour them in 2 different glasses and don't show them the bottle.
Right.
Like, you have your audio files that care about, like, the high fidelity speakers, and if they fine tune their high and their low ends, and they make sure everything sounds perfect, maybe they treat their room, versus 95% of the population that listens to their song on their earbuds and in the car.
Correct.
Like, as long as it sounds good enough to be in the car and it's not booming your bass everywhere, or it's so piercing that, like, oh, I have to turn that off, or it's too quiet and they have to turn it all the way up, and then their next song scares the crap out of them, you're fine. Like,
and know your audience, and know your genre too, because some genres you cannot get away with having like a demo sounding mix.
No, and then some genres, like, my brother listens to some hip hop stuff that, like, it sounds god awful. Like, the bass is distorted, like, but it's intentional.
Yeah.
And the people that like that music like that sound. And that's just what it is.
That is, like, if you're in that, then absolutely go for it. Like, don't
push your limiter to the max.
Man. Like, real digital clippings is seeing that as a negative thing is like a thing of the past these days. And so, but if you are like a freaking metal artist, or you're in rock and stuff like that,
it needs to be polished.
It needs to be polished because that fan base, a lot of that fan base are people that really do pay attention to that. And not everybody, obviously, but a lot of them do. And so it's knowing what it is, what you want to do, and again, figuring out what part you want to play in it. Removing ego. You don't have to be the person that does everything. There's sometimes I talk to friends who it's like, I'm a great songwriter, but I'm an okay producer, and that somehow makes me like not good enough. I have to be able to like produce as good as this person does, and I'm like, why?
Why? I loved that part that Nick D said in the conversation with Adam Ivy that Jesse kind of was making fun of, that he was like, I was a professional photographer. Like, I went and did all these weddings, and I specifically did not use any of that gear when I started out, because if it's too nice, it's almost inauthentic at that point, because people are like, wait, this is way too produced. Like, you want that audience to grow with you. You want that tribe to grow with you. And so if you have all those nice things, at a lot of times it can be a detriment. Like you want people to be like, oh wow, this guy's, I just found him, he's super new. Like you can kind of tell he's new, but like the sound's good, like the music's good, and it's obviously not demo, it's not crap, but like if you have something that's almost too polished right off the bat, people might not even like, it might work against you in ways.
Yeah, there's two types of fans, I think, in that vein, because interestingly enough, for me, and I think it's because I'm in this.
Sure.
If I discover someone who hasn't popped off yet, I have discovered so many artists like that, and because they never break, they eventually just it becomes impossible to like find them. And so that's such a huge letdown for me in a way. When I find something that is very, very produced and it's like they're obviously like doing something, there's almost like a security that I'm like, I'm going to continue to keep seeing stuff from these people because they're set off. So I think that it depends. There are people that I think
it's a middle ground.
Yeah. And there are people that they only want to discover people that, you know, they're total hipster about it, and not, I don't mean in a negative way. They're like, I want to discover this artist before anyone else does, and they don't like it when that artist blows up. That's totally fair. And then there are
our scene is very guilty of that.
Yeah.
Like,
oh, totally.
We have like there's like Spirit Box, for example, like as far as like the emo kind of metal rock scene, like Spirit Box was one of those bands that they started kind of mid-level, like as far as our bands go, and then they hit like this point where they just blew up everywhere. Or Sleep Token, where they had that kind of lower audience, and they had that one TikTok song, and now you have all these new fans, which is great, and they're selling out all over the world, but then you also have like some older fans that are turned off from that. So it's just like kind of a weird marketing thing. Like you have to find that balance, and you have to be okay with losing people and gaining new people.
Yeah, and figuring out, you know, who you are, because when I was growing up, that was totally me, and I was like totally the insufferable kid that was just like,
oh, they're
like,
too big now.
Well, no, I mean either that or I needed to remind you that I'm the one that put you on.
100%. I'm still guilty of that, man.
Dude,
like,
I mean, now it sits in the back of my mind when someone's like listening to something and they're like, "Did you listen to my younger brother?" Hilariously enough, he's like that. He'll be like, "Did you hear, you know, this new song by that?" And I'm like, "Did I hear?" Bitch,
I'm the one who showed you that song.
Yeah, I know, right?
I know. Or like my youngest sister, like. So my younger brother Tate, he'll show her a song that I showed him. Yeah. And then she's like, "Oh yeah, Tate showed me the song." I'm like, "No, I showed that to Tate." Like I still do that to this day, and it's so funny that like we have that part of us that we like want to be the person to. Oh, it's almost like we have ownership in it.
Yeah.
And you want people to have ownership in your music. You want people to be like, "Man, I found this guy. I found this song. Like it's so cool." And that just comes to good song crafting. It
does. And so I think, again, I like playing I like the idea of keeping things authentic so that someone can discover you and be like, "Oh, this person, you know, they have to, I'm like going to be part of their journey of discovery." But then there's another side that I personally enjoy, again, as a consumer and as a creator, that like I like things to look a little larger than life.
Sure.
I think that like we've lost a little bit of you know, there was a time where you didn't know shit about Prince.
Yeah. Except
for what you saw on a magazine cover and saw him live.
Yep.
And I am also a person that I'm not super stoked about having my personal life and everything about me just like all over the fucking internet. I don't, you know, I'm as when I was younger, and maybe it's an age thing. When I was younger, I like the idea of like vlogging and doing stuff like that. I loved it. I was like, "Oh my God, you know, here is everything about me." Now I'm at a place where I'm just like,
you want your personal, you want your privacy.
And I love the idea of if you like me for my music and there's like elements of my personality that you like from the little that I show you, then cool. But I think that striking a balance between doing stuff that looks intentional and produced and cool is awesome. And then doing stuff that's like vulnerable is cool and awesome. But I think that sometimes the authentic and vulnerable and raw can feel not natural. So that's what I'm saying is like being honest with yourself. For me, setting up a camera in my bedroom, talking about like going over a recording, that doesn't feel as like authentic to me.
Sure.
Because in a way, what feels
it's forced.
In a way, it feels way more authentic to me to shoot a music video.
Yeah.
And some people are not like that. Some people are like, I fucking hate shooting music videos. I feel super awkward. I am like maybe just like an attention whore or what, but I'm just like, I love that moment. I'm dressed up and I feel like a fucking rock star, and as cheesy as it sounds. You're on
set, you're having a good time.
I love that personally. Yeah. And so it's like, don't just follow make it seem super like raw all the time just because people are saying that that's what works. Because again, think of who your audience is. And I think that there's something, I mean, you mentioned it, and it's true that if you do blow up, you're always going to lose people because they think that you got too big, and that boils down to like, I think there's no such thing as selling out until you stop doing the thing that you love doing. Sure. There is something for sure about you love a band. The first 2 records are like just masterpieces. They all of a sudden become huge, and then it feels more radio friendly. And then their record is completely like active rock, NFL commercial, arena, and you're like, okay, when did the second that a band starts going, oh, whoa, whoa, in a chorus,
go and Imagine Dragons on you.
You know that you're like, okay, this is, and there's a place, there's a time and place for those kinds of bands for sure. Yeah. But I'm just saying, as long as you are, I think Fat Mike of NoFX was talking about Green Day, and he was saying, I never thought those motherfuckers sold out. It was just they were doing their shit, and at the time, that's what everyone was like loving. Yeah, and that's the dream right there. That's the dream, yeah, for sure. But sometimes that's not what's happening, and so do what it is that you love, and in the way that you love it. And I have to believe that. And again, think about what it is that you want. If you want to be million follower artist on TikTok, and you want that, then do what that requires. Do what that requires. But I know that for me, in the style of music that I create, in the style of content that I want to create, it's probably going to have, I mean, obviously I know that there's success in it because there's people doing it right now, but it's not going to have the same level of success
in the long run. You're not going to be a Beyonce. You're not going to be a Taylor Swift.
And quite honestly, I fucking don't give a shit. Yeah. And I don't even, I don't even.
You don't need it.
I literally
it's
don't
not
even,
necessary.
If I have.
Necessary. I said that weird.
Have been able to, I've been able to like create so many things that I want in my life specifically. I fully believe in like my power to do that. And having that confidence, I look at that level of success and I'm like, I don't want it. So, but I'm sure that there are people that do. And so I think that's what I like the most about Nick's approach is, again,
do what you love.
Do what you want to do.
Yeah. Well, I think wrapping up, the end of the day, it all just kind of hitting those bullet points kind of hits. Just make sure you're being consistent. Make sure you're being authentic to yourself. And I mean, we would love to just have you guys on this journey as we kind of figure it out for ourselves, because this is a growing process, and we're trying to do this on our own as we're talking to you about it. And I think we would just love to have you guys on that journey of hearing our thought process and what's worked, what hasn't worked. And I mean, we'll go more into that in future episodes, but I think
this is a perfect example of that, because it's not like the world needs another fucking podcast.
No.
And I think it's cool, and we're doing this because we want to do it.
And we want to share our knowledge and experience and stuff that we've failed for the past, almost 2 decades. Like, I think there's enough value in the stuff that we have fallen on our faces doing that we don't want other people to necessarily have to go through that. While I do think, you do have to fall to stand back up, and you have to go through some trial and error because that's important.
Yeah.
Also having things that like is just solid knowledge and truth.
Yeah.
Like that's the most impactful thing. And we just want to kind of be able to give that back a little bit, because it's not fun getting to be a musician and having to face that negativity and that turn down and all that stuff on a daily basis. So
yeah, we're out here trying, and I think we have a unique place and a perspective, because we're coming from a time where there was a time where my early success in touring, like early success in touring in particular, where first of all, tour was like kind of like the only way that you could do that.
Yeah.
And then second of all, where promotion on touring basically meant either radio or going to the fucking local mall in that city and handing out flyers, you know?
Or handing out CDs outside of your favorite show.
Exactly.
Like,
and now we're in a different place, and we're learning that we're in that new place and going through the learning process. And I think that it's cool. I think that's why the podcasts are successful and enjoyable, because it's a way to sort of have a conversation with a lot of people going through the same journey. So,
well, thank you guys for listening in.
Signing off.
Michael, Fons, we appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.